everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined by special guest host, Dave Dixon.
Hey guys, it's good to be with you all again.
Yes, our normal guest host has lost his voice, which is not particularly great for doing a podcast. So hopefully Rob will be back with us next time. But Dave is joining us.
Get well soon, Rob.
All right, so we've got an excellent show in store for you. We are going to talk about the box office. We have lots of stuff out and lots of stuff coming out. Then we're going to try a new segment for our discussion where we're calling it Movie Free for All, where we just bring anything and everything to the table and we just back and forth discuss anything we want to discuss about movies. So that should be fun. And of course, as always, our watch list. You ready to get started?
Absolutely, man. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So let's begin, as always, with our box office. So last week in the box office, second week for Mario Brothers, second slam dunk week for Mario Brothers. 92.3 million in week two. In week two, that is one of the lowest drop-off rates we've seen for a major movie in recent times. I didn't look up to see the specific stats on that. I meant to, and I forgot.
I was gonna say, if my memory serves me correctly, it's the best box office for an animated movie since Frozen.
Yeah, and it actually
was the first or the second, but yeah,
internationally it beat Frozen in week one. But
Illumination's definitely outdone themselves on this, so it's good job to them for really taking something that's so iconic to really what is now multi-generational.
Yeah.
And doing such a great job with it.
Yeah, for sure. So in addition to this 92.3 million, it is now domestically, in 2 weeks, 353.2 million. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone saw it coming. What do you got?
Well, no, I would say on the Mario Brothers, for sure, definitely, I don't think anyone saw it coming. I mean, definitely there was a lot of harassment about who was being selected for which roles and, who was voicing who. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So I think that definitely caught people off. But I think the other side of this is let's be honest, on the bar of quality for a movie about Mario Brothers.
Yeah,
it was really low. So anything this one did was going to be beyond expectation for that. So good job. Good job for those guys. Great family movie. So excited for hopefully now we'll get some more of it.
And the crazy thing is, and we talked about this a little bit last week, is all the other top animated movies of all time, all of them in the initial weeks were all sequels to established blockbusters. So that's what makes this even more remarkable, is this is not a sequel to an already established franchise. This is the first movie of this kind for Mario Brothers. So really, really impressive.
Yeah, but we'll add to that though. I mean, what's interesting about this one though is while it's not a sequel, I mean, you're talking about a property that's beloved now by all of our millennials and Gen Z, all that. So so I think while not a sequel, they definitely tapped into the nostalgia factor that is very in vogue right now.
At the same time, we've seen lots of other things that should have ready-made fan bases not particularly succeed at the box office.
Yeah.
So it's whatever. I haven't seen it yet, but whatever they're doing it right. Just to round out the other top five.
I in the box office here before we go on though.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I do have to give a shout out here to Russell Crowe.
Yes.
For the Pope's Exorcist piece here. For I mean, he got his 9 million, but that preview really did nothing for me to want to go see that movie. And as much as I love Russell Crowe, man, I kind of felt like this was maybe not his best choice, but maybe next time.
I've talked about this. The horror genre is not my genre, in particular, like the glorification of evil and that sort of things that a lot of these ones have. Not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so that was number two in the box office. The Pope's Exorcist did 9 million in its first week. So I mean, for a horror film, they've usually done a little bit better, but I think the shadow of Mario is still holding sway. John Wick 4 in its fourth week did 8 million. That's up to 160 domestic. That's going to end up being the top grossing
Yeah.
John Wick film. Renfield in its first week, the Nicolas Cage as Dracula movie, uh, yeah, did 8 million.
I feel like it's one of these things where they just say, what hasn't Nick Cage done, and how can we get it into a movie? And so, of
Yeah,
course, Dracula had to be on that list.
yeah.
So,
And Air rounded out the top five at 7.8 million. In its second week, it's up to 33.4 million domestically.
yeah.
Anything else? Any other comments on
Yeah.
anything?
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. It was probably a good move for them to get Mario Brothers out now before real summer movie season hits. So
Yeah.
I know the hits are coming.
Yeah. And we'll definitely be hitting that on the podcast in the next couple of weeks. But now we move on to what is coming out this week. And we have an array of films coming out this week. The first one that we'll talk about, and we'll go through the list first, and then we'll talk about anything that stands out. So is Beau is Afraid. This is another A24 release, and this one stars Joaquin Phoenix, and it's the story of a movie that follows the sudden death of his mother. A mild-mannered but anxiety-ridden man confronts his darkest fears as he embarks on an epic Kafka-esque odyssey back home. So that is
Yeah.
Beau is Afraid. Another one that's
Yeah.
coming out this week is Somewhere in Queens, and that is Leo and Angela Russell live a simple life in Queens, surrounded by their overbearing Italian-American family. When their son Styx finds his success on the high school basketball team, Leo tears the family apart to try and make it happen. So this is Ray Romano, Jennifer Esposito, Laurie Metcalf in this one.
Yep.
Evil Dead Rise. So here's another horror entrance, part of
Yep.
the Evil Dead franchise. A
Yeah.
twisted tale of two estranged sisters whose reunion is cut short by the rise of flesh-possessing demons, thrusting them into a primal battle for survival as they face the most nightmarish version of family imaginable.
Yeah. Maybe it's just me, but I feels like these are the ones that didn't make the actual Halloween window, and so they kind of got pushed to the spring. But
Yeah,
what do I know?
yeah. You can only come out with so many.
Right.
And Chevalier.
Yep.
And this stars Calvin Harrison Jr. and Samara Weaving. And this is based on the true story of composer Joseph Bologna. Chevalier de Saint George, the illegitimate son of an African slave and a French plantation owner whose rise to heights in French society as a composer before an ill-fated love affair. So that's that one. And another new entrance, The Covenant. And this is Guy
Yep.
Ritchie's latest film. This stars Jake
This is
Gyllenhaal
new. Yep.
and Dar Salim. And this is, it follows U.S. Army Sergeant John Kinley and Afghan interpreter Ahmed. And it's basically a story of Ahmed saves the U.S. Army major's life, and then he has to go and return the favor. So that's Guy Ritchie's latest film, The Covenant. All right, Rob, or geez, I'm saying Rob already.
Man, come
Dave,
on.
this
Well,
is
at least we
like,
made a few
oh
minutes in first.
man. All right. So,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
what do you think
Yeah.
about the entrance in this box office, and which one would you be most likely to want to go see?
Wow. So this is kind of, to me, this is this kind of round here. This is a little bit of the lull before summer movie season. You can kind of see it in how they scheduled it out. But of these, my top two I want to see is Beau is Afraid. I don't know if you've caught some of the trailers with
Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix and everything. But I mean, as much as Joaquin kind of comes off as sort of crazy sometimes, the guy can act
Oh yeah.
tremendously, particularly in these roles that have characters that are struggling psychologically or
Hmm.
emotionally.
Yeah.
And so this is another one, and so it'll my gut feeling on is that it'll be another great performance by Joaquin, but probably just understated amongst the other things.
Yeah.
And then the other one I wanted to see is the Covenant,
Yeah.
Guy Ritchie's newest. I mean, guy always does great action movies.
Hmm.
I was a little disappointed with the idea of going back to the Afghanistan and then not using a true story.
Yeah.
So it's actually not based on a true story. It's based on kind of like a novelization of a couple different ideas.
Hmm.
So I was, when I think of war stories, sometimes it's good to go and get the real thing.
This is one of those where it's kind of a fictionalized story based on something that partially on something that has happened, like us leaving all our interpreters over there. And
Right? Yeah,
then,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and then, kind of like a take on, okay, what could be done? What could have been done about that? I kind of feel like that's the
yeah,
vibe I'm getting here is like, here's
yeah,
something that I don't like that happened. And I'm going to tell a movie about trying to deal with that. I mean, that was
yeah,
my take on it. Um, it's also interesting. Guy
yeah.
Ritchie has done some stuff that's a little bit more serious, but this one does not have his normal humor overtones and to it at all. Like
No,
it's a straight drama action film. So I'm curious to see
yeah,
what that looks like for Guy, because there's usually like even when he did like the Sherlock Holmes movies, there was an element of comedy to them,
yeah,
but
yeah.
but
That's
this
right.
one definitely
That's right.
doesn't. So I'm curious to see what that looks like
Yeah,
for Guy Ritchie.
yeah. But it'll be good to see Jake Gyllenhaal back in a lead
Mm-hmm.
role. He hasn't had a strong one in a while. I think this could be another place for him to get in and be a good action star. You see some of that with some of like the maybe what we might classify as aging acting stars. I know Jake's probably as old as like the Tom Cruises and stuff like that, but it's good to see him stepping back in for another lead role.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised if we end up revisiting Beau is Afraid come Oscar time. The combination of this
Yeah,
type of
yeah,
movie with an actor who's known for being good in these roles and is known for being
yeah,
nominated for
yeah.
Oscars. This is the exact type of movie the Academy likes to nominate. So don't be surprised if
It
you end
is.
up seeing
It
this
is.
one come back around next year come Oscar time.
That's right.
All
That's
right.
right.
Anything else on the box office?
Nope.
All right, so let's move on to our discussion. And this, like I said, this is the first of this attempt at a segment, and this is basically a movie free for all. Normally, we try to be a little bit more planned out with our segments and cover a specific topic, but sometimes we just run
Yep.
into stuff that like we just want to talk about movies.
Yeah,
That may
man.
not be enough for a whole segment on its own, but it's interesting to discuss. So that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna go back and forth on some things that we've encountered that we want to talk about on movies and
All
see how
right.
it goes.
All right. So
So
what do you got, man?
yeah, so I the first thing I'll talk about is I've found this podcast and I forget exactly how I found it. I was thinking it was probably through like I follow Christopher McQuarrie, the Mission
Oh yeah.
Impossible director, on
Hmm.
Twitter, and he might have like talked about this, but eventually somehow I found this podcast called Light the Fuse podcast, which is basically a
Okay.
podcast centered around the Mission Impossible franchise and
Hmm.
how you do a weekly podcast centered around a film franchise that has six films. and,
It's
and
it's spanned
it,
it's spanned a lot of time
it's
though.
spanned a lot of times. But I found it incredibly fascinating because what they do is they basically just interview a bunch of people who are either in the movies or a lot of whom who are tangentially associated with the series in
Okay.
some
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. So recently, in a recent episode, they interviewed a woman whose name is very hard to pronounce, so I'm not going to do it. But she was the VFX associate producer on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. So basically, she was
Okay,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
the head of all of the VFX work that was then farmed out to the VFX places.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
To do the individual shots. So it was a fascinating look at what all goes into the VFX for a movie. And she had some interesting things to say about the series itself. But she specifically worked on Rogue Nation and all the intricacies that was going on there. And it was fascinating insight into like their story construction of like they kind of write the script as they're filming and they have an idea of
Oh
scenes they want
wow.
to do, and then they work out ways to connect and reconnect things. And she told the story about like the movie starts with the scene where Tom Cruise is hanging off the plane. When
Yeah.
they shot that was supposed to be the movie's finale. Like they
Interesting.
rewrote the movie to such an extent that was supposed to be like in the third act, like one of the
What?
height of the movie, and it ends up being like the intro in the final version of the movie. So
What?
fascinating stuff. So she just had some really, really interesting things to say.
Interesting. That is crazy. Bet you Tom
What
Cruise was bummed about that. He's like, I did all this work for the big finale, and now
one of
well,
the other guys on the
that's
podcast
crazy.
talked about when they were doing some stuff for Dead Reckoning, and they were out like riding horses in the desert. And the one guy's like, "Oh, this will be a great third act to your movie," and Tom's like, "Dude, this is the intro." So, just that's
That's
the type of
awesome.
scale
That's
they're
awesome.
working with. But she told another fascinating story. I
Yeah.
think this is classic. Like she worked on the production on some of the VFX for Avatar, the first Avatar, and
Yeah,
she
yeah.
she said that James Cameron wanted the VFX team, and you know how much VFX there was in Avatar. He wanted
Oh
the
yeah.
VFX
Yeah. I mean,
team to
like,
do all of the shots for all 6 hours of the original things that they filmed before he did any editing. Like he basically
what?
wanted them to do the entire 6 hours that they had before he did any editing, before he wanted to do any cuts. And so they were in the meeting where they
Dang.
were trying to tell him, no. But can you imagine that? Like, that's exactly James Cameron. Like, no, I don't want to edit until I've got 6 hours of fully rendered movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to edit these people standing in front of the green screen or dancing with cameras on their head. I want my blue people and I want to edit them.
I mean, can you imagine that? Like,
Wow. That's
I mean,
crazy though.
yeah. I mean, it took them like they had 12. What the 3 hour version they had was they had like 12 different outfits working on the VFX for that one. I mean, I can't even
Yeah, I can't
imagine what they were
imagine
trying
how
to do for
long
like
that would have
six
taken
hours.
and how much that would have cost. Yeah, I
Yeah.
bet you that studio head, he was in on that meeting too, like, nah, we ain't spending another $1 billion on your movie.
I
The
mean,
3 hour version was already 1 billion.
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think that, oh no, let's do the whole thing for 6 hours and then I'll figure out what I want to keep.
No way. No
Nuts
way.
and
That's nuts. That
yeah.
is nuts. Well, something I've been thinking about in this realm is, trying to track with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they've really done a great job, particularly in that first kind of like season, the first, however 3 or 4 phases, all the way up through Endgame and everything. And now
Mhm.
they introduced this new kind of like big boss for the second major move of the cinematic universe. Kang, if you
Mhm.
haven't seen Ant-Man and
I have.
Quantumanium yet, it's
I have.
Kang. If you're familiar with that, who Kang is in the comics and everything, they're kind of setting him up as the next big guy. Well, then news started to come out over these last couple of weeks that Jonathan Majors, the guy that plays Kang and all of the infinite Kangs that there are, that he's being under suspicion for some domestic abuse and violence issues.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that strikes me about this is like you got to wonder what if I'm thinking, if I'm Marvel, if I'm Disney, and I'm looking at who am I going to invest in for what will realistically be the next 8 to 10 years? Like, what are those background checks like? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on there? Because in my mind, like this has a potential to be a significant blow
Hmm.
to this next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because really, I mean, the first one really rested on the heroes, and they needed a bad guy to be able to raise to that level.
Yeah.
Well, as they move into this next kind of over, story arc of the cinematic universe, they really need a bad guy that's going to drive this.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you know the story of Kang, that character can do it. But now, if your actor is, your kind of your key actor is in trouble, that's not going to be looking so good, especially when the box office for the last several Marvel movies really haven't been up to the par that
Hmm.
the previous ones had been. So I can see this having a big issue, and it's a good
Yeah.
reminder that how we live our lives personally has a significant effect on how we on our lives professionally.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll see what happens. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, it's kind of there's kind of two things that immediately pop up. It's like you don't often think about like background checking actors, but like we're coming up on next week is
yeah.
the NFL draft, and you always hear about it there. Like teams
Oh
going in,
yeah.
like talking to high school teachers, talking to former
Yep.
coaches, talking to their friends and their roommates and stuff. Because if you're going to make this big multi-million dollar investment and pick that player
Yep.
over another player, like you need to be sure. And I guess I hadn't really considered that when it came to uh, doing that kind of homework when you're going to start building a franchise around somebody.
Yeah.
I guess maybe in part because
Yeah.
a lot of times a lot of these people are very famous already and you kind of feel like you already know them, but you still would need to do backgrounds. And Jonathan Majors is not a well-known player before this past year, where he's had a couple major
Yeah.
moments. Um, so
Yeah.
I think about that is really interesting. Like, I wonder what that process
Yeah.
is like. Because it is like you are, it's even in some ways bigger than the NFL draft because you're building potentially multiple multi hundreds of $1 million movies, $1 billion movies
That's
around
right.
a particular individual from that
Yeah.
standpoint. And for Majors himself, it's like you could not do anything more to sabotage right when you're like about ready to hit like your peak in the movie industry. Because you just had
Yeah.
multiple major movies come out that were huge successes. You
Yeah.
are now arrived, and like at the moment where you're
That's
just
right.
arriving, you screw it up. Yeesh.
Yep. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, now, again, none of the stuff's been,
True.
proven or anything like that. So, we'll wait and see.
Mhm.
But I think it's just that it's the reality of, like, you go to build a franchise around somebody, to some extent, their personal character matters
Yeah.
in that a big, big deal. So,
And
yeah.
you're seeing the same thing a little bit when it came to DC, because DC has that issue with Ezra Miller.
Oh,
And
yeah, absolutely.
it's like, I mean, they had serious decisions to make about the future of his character because
Yeah.
he's in some really questionable situations
Yeah.
that you really have to wonder, like, should you be continuing to promote this guy? Um,
Yeah.
and with DC struggles already, like it just feels like another hit now. And that's Marvel is kind of sinking to
Yeah.
that level a little bit. Phase 4 has been very uneven and seemingly
Yeah.
lacking in direction. And it seemed like they took a step forward with the introduction of Kang for Jonathan Majors. Like stuff was starting to come together. And if this
Yeah.
is a black eye for them, that's just another hit to phase 4.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like I said, you got, like, because you've lost so many main characters, you got to have the big bad guy
Yeah.
to really drive the series of movies. And if for some reason Majors can't go forward or can't be that guy, it's gonna look bad if they have to kind of like recast or like retell the story of Kang with a different actor or something like that. But like I said, we'll see. We'll see how
Yeah.
it turns out.
Yeah. So this is one I know you'll have opinions on. Uh, so
Oh, oh,
you know where I'm going with
never shy in opinions.
this. So I came across a YouTube video from a guy who's, I guess he's not a huge YouTube guy yet, but it was a fascinating video. It was like almost like a half hour look at examining specifically why Star Wars Episode 2 looks like a video game. He was
Okay.
saying, why does it look so CG? Like, he's basically like, the common language he would often get when people said they didn't like the movie and didn't like how it looks is like, oh, it looks like a video
Oh
game.
yeah.
So he goes into
Yeah.
a huge amount of detail on this. It's a fascinating video. I'll try to link to it in the show notes. But he explains, first of all, it's like, if you look at video games at the time, no, it didn't. Like, it looked much better than video games at the time. He's like, but
It did. It
what
did.
were people actually getting at? And he basically comes to the idea of like, people can recognize that something doesn't look right, and they just don't
Yeah.
have the language to understand how
Yeah.
to explain it, or even specifically to pick out exactly what doesn't look right. So he's
Yep.
like, okay, so let's examine it. And so he goes into the minutest detail as to all the visual
That's crazy.
effects and the visual things they did, from like the cameras they chose, to the way they did the CG, to like the sheer amount of CG shots. It was
Oh
fascinating.
yeah.
You were saying like the Lord of the Rings that came out around that same time had like 800 VFX shots, and Star Wars Episode 2 had 2,000.
Yep.
And like,
Yep.
from the low res cameras to the VFX, to like they bringing in brand new technology that wasn't yet perfected for some of this stuff. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
he'll go and show you like how a shadow that shouldn't be there is still there, when a character moves, or like trying to duplicate clothing and things like that they wouldn't have needed to do. And he goes through all these details about what it was. And so, like, that combination of all these little things times out to make it look incredibly off. It just looks off to everybody, and
Hmm.
don't like it. So it was really interesting. I want to get your thoughts on that whole idea.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, one of the biggest knocks of the prequel trilogy was the almost the abusive use of CGI.
Yeah.
I mean, like you go back and if you look at like some of the images of them acting out scenes for that, I mean, even McGregor and Hayden Christensen, all those guys, they spent so much time on a green screen, with different. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, I don't know if they even let them outside during filming on those things, and that's one of the big differences between how Peter Jackson shot Lord of the Rings. I mean, they were on site in New Zealand,
Yeah.
so a lot of the VFX effects were overlays onto real shots of real places,
Mm-hmm.
whereas most of the stuff in Star Wars, you might have like a physical foreground object or something very small like that, but all the backgrounds were CGI. All of the even things on the walls were CGI, and because of that, like you're completely dependent upon the computer for depth,
Mm-hmm.
for shadow, for all of that. And at the time particularly, it just wasn't, I mean, it just wasn't up to the capability even of today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was a huge knock, and part of that goes back to the whole thing of like George Lucas kind of forgot what made Star Wars to begin with. But yeah, he just kind of went overboard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same kind of mentality he took when he went and messed with the original trilogy by creating special editions, which those special editions were just him adding more computer generated graphics to his own movies. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, not a big fan. Not a big fan. Definitely wish they would have done it different, but what's done is done.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Um, So one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this may be something that you could put into future podcasts as well. But one of the things I think about, whether it's in my job or within different parts of my life, is like, what's the question is like, what's the future of that going to be? You know, so like when I think of like movies right now, like let's say like, probably like, early to mid 2000s, like really before we hit that superhero era, right? So I think the first like big wave, I'm not counting like the 90s Batmans. I'm thinking more like the Spider-Man
Mhm.
2001, right? You have the early the Batman Begins there in the early 2000s, and that really kind of kick starts what will become this superhero era, where realistically now most of the movies that are considered blockbuster movies are superhero movies. There's
Yeah.
really not, or if they're not superhero movies, they're part of IPs that already exist, or they're part of stories that already exist. We're not seeing as much original material hit the high end of the box office,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not saying it doesn't exist in indie or small films or film festivals or those things, but it's not hitting the high end. But we're kind of seeing now that the superhero era is kind of like winding its way through, right? We just talked about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We talked about that, like it's slowed down a little bit. But what's my question is what's the future of cinema? Because cinema usually tells us something about our culture.
Yeah.
And typically there's something that's happening where it's representing something that either the culture is wanting to hear or wanting to see lived out through its characters. And so I'm curious, what's the next and kind of what's the future of cinema? So I have some thought. I mean, I'd like to hear yours if you have any takes
Yeah.
on that, and like share one of mine.
I think one of the problems, and I talked about this on the podcast a number of weeks ago when we talked about like movies and culture, but I think one of
Yeah.
the problems for Hollywood right now is they're ideologically stuck. And because
Yeah.
they're ideologically stuck, they have a hard time making good art.
Mm,
Because they're so focused on other things other than trying to make great films that
yeah.
it's really hurt the art form of that. And so the only things they can produce of any sort of things that people want to see are content that was half of which was already created from a previous era. And so they're riding
Yeah.
that coattails of a previous era before they got so heavily involved in some of this ideological stuff. And so I think they have a choice to make, and the choice to make is what are we going to do? Are we going to continue to produce the same type of things we've been doing and watch box office numbers trickle in that are not what we're expecting, and then we shrink down our budgets, and then studios go bankrupt and you end up with a bit of a mess? Or are we going to take the hint from things like Top Gun Maverick or things like Super Mario Brothers, where we can say, hey, let's get back to creating great films. Let's get back to creating great entertainment. And if they can get back to creating great entertainment and not worry so much about, let's just say, like the political stuff, then
Yeah.
I think there's a future. But I don't know that that's going to be an easy transition for them.
Mm-mm.
So that may, and the problem is like even some of the upstarts like to the movie industry, like Amazon and Netflix, who are out there producing movies,
Yeah.
have some of the same issues. So it's not like there is a great alternative that's going to come in and revitalize the industry. So there's some choices to make, and I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, I think the desire to stay alive will drive them in a better direction, but it may be a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I mean, when you think about the movie industry as a whole, as much as we love to think of it as an art form, particularly when it comes to the box office as a whole, it's largely driven not so much by the art as much as it is by what makes the most money.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things align, but oftentimes I find them to be in competition with one another.
Yeah, definitely.
But one of the things I think that's going to happen, and if it does, you heard it here first on the Fans for Film podcast.
Yes.
Is I think what's going to happen is that when we think about what drives us to like be engaged with movies, so regardless of the genre, regardless of kind of the, what is it, an action movie, is it a war movie, what's going to happen in our characters though is our characters are going to become a lot more grounded in reality. Where they're going to become a lot more people that we would look at and say, that might be me. And not in an aspirational way, but actually more and more in a kind of a almost like a downgrade of the hero.
Yeah.
Like there's actually going to be a longing for the everyday that people will, even though these everyday people might end up in these extraordinary circumstances that they find themselves in a film.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be that everyday person. And I think that's what's going to happen is we're going to see the characters that we kind of connect with most become more everyday. Because I think what's going to happen is as the world actually becomes more digitally oriented, as there's this push towards the metaverse, the undercurrent underneath that is going to be actually for us to long for human connection.
Yeah.
And it's going to be more in the everyday. And so our movies are going to illustrate that, but they're not going to illustrate it by necessarily shifting up the genres. They're going to illustrate it by shifting up the characters that we identify with and that we gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And I think that will be the big shift in cinema, in the next 10, 15, maybe 20 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll bring in this point too, where I think you're going to see stuff because it's a little bit different than well, and given time, I'm going to skip one of the ones I was going to do, so I'll bring part of my point in here. I think what you're also going to see is you're going to see more things centered around, particularly in the sci-fi realm. You're going to see much more things centered around the future of what the future holds via AI. You saw a bunch of movies in the 1990s, particularly action and sci-fi, basically playing around with the idea, okay, now that the internet age has arrived, what is the future of the world given the technology that now exists? And I think you're going to see a revamp of that idea around the future of AI, especially when you're seeing things like Chat GPT and a bunch of those other AI bots coming out that are becoming much more useful and ubiquitous. And what does that now mean? I mean, it's already starting to change schools in a major way because they're now having to come up with like checks to see whether something was written by Chat GPT and not by a student. And it's already starting to have massive inroads.
I used it for something today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. and just, that sort of thing. And another 90s theme that came up is like, your world is not real, is another theme that went through some of the late 90s, early 2000s movies. And you're going to see a revitalization of that again, particularly around the area of AI, where AI can do such a good job recreating voices, recreating images, recreating things, that is going to be very, very difficult. Determining reality from something that was created is is going to become more and more difficult. And I think you're going to see much more movies delving into that concept and that idea.
Yeah, but I think that's actually why, though, it will be the longing for the everyday. It'll be longing for that which is actually real.
Yes.
So so you'll see this play out, and you'll see, particularly I think of things like animation, computer generated, like, those things have the potential now to be done more and more by AI.
Yeah.
But what will draw people in won't be the wow, look how good that looks.
Yeah.
it won't be, because it'll actually be, it's going to become more and more commonplace for something to look almost perfect.
Yeah.
It'll actually be the imperfection. It'll be the kind of the layer to it, or
Mhm.
the grittiness of it, or
Yeah.
that will actually begin to what draw people in.
And I think some things that we've taken for granted in movies previously that were well made points will come a bigger factor along
Yeah.
with what you're saying. Like Inception, of course, comes to my mind. What ultimately grounds that movie is that he finally comes to the understanding that
Hmm.
reality is better than fantasy. And so at the end, he
Yep.
finally makes that decision. He finally makes that break that reality is better than fantasy. And I think you're going to
Right.
see that theme coming back more and more. Is like people are going to
Yeah.
want things
Yeah.
that are reality as opposed to
Yeah.
fantasy, and longing for a way to understand what's real and what's fake.
Yeah. And storytellers are going to have to walk that line, because, when we think of stories, they still are fairy tales, or but it's probably going to be more in the world of how we would want it to be, not just the bleak reality of it as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, but I say these things about the future, but, even as you bring up AI, it just very well could be that 10, 15 years from now, the Terminators enslave us all, and none of this actually happens. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that was good. I like that. We'll have to bring that segment back on a number of occasions. I like that. So let's
There you
let's go
go.
on watch list. Movies that we've watched recently and what we thought about them. So Dave, what do you got? You got anything you've seen recently?
So I'm gonna bring in a little bit of the family element here. So one of the things, I have kids that are kind of growing into their double digit years. So my oldest is 12, and then my second is 11. And so one of the things they've recently got into is they read all the Harry Potter books. So of course the natural piece of that is, well, we want to watch the movies.
Yeah.
And so we've been kind of going through. We made it through the fourth movie now, and was just reminded of, really like what was a big generational
Hmm.
uh, series for many. Like I remember when they were coming out and how they came out. And even the idea of, and they were really the first to do this really well, but the idea of like having actors that were the same characters all the way through, and like really planning and around, their growth. Although they still got kind of old looking by the end, they kind of like had to make them look younger. But
Yeah.
but I mean, like, but it's the idea of like, Warner Brothers, and the crew there, they were really one of the first to commit to that whole idea for the long haul,
Yeah.
and they did it, and they did it too. They pulled off all the movies, so it's been really cool to watch those. And so if you're listening to this, and if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's been a while since you've um, gone back and watched those, and go back and watch them. Like they're quality movies.
Yeah, and I think one of the fun experiences about movies is once you've seen something a few times, is to go back and show it to somebody who's watching it for the first time. You
Oh
kind of get
yeah,
caught up in that and they capture it. Oh, I can't wait till they see this moment or this thing. And just to watch someone
yeah,
experience it for the first time, it gives you that joy again to watch it.
that's right. That's right. So
Uh
that actually would be
yeah.
the second movie on my watch list. So I had one of my coworkers, we were talking the other day, and he had not seen Tenet,
Oh.
and I was like, "Come on, man, you got to see this." So so he comes over and we watch Tenet, and literally after the movie is done, he just sits there and is like, "I think I'm gonna have to watch that again." Like he's like his mind was just still stopping to think about it and stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you have not seen Tenet, although if you're a fan of this podcast, I can't imagine you not being a fan of Tenet. So, but
Yeah.
if you have not, go watch that one again.
Yeah. On a side note for that, I've been watching some of the great YouTube videos people have done explaining the dynamics of various scenes. There's some really, really good YouTube content like explaining like why how things look the
Oh
way
yeah,
they do and the reversals and exploring the scenes like the stall 12 scene.
yeah,
Like that scene is so crazy, it's hard to keep it all straight. And so there's like animations
yeah,
that they do to let you know everything that's
yeah,
happening. It's really, really well done. Some people
yeah.
spend a lot of time on that.
That's right. The best part is still the last line that Richard Pattinson, his character gives. He's like, "No, it's all good. It's already happened." And he
Yep.
turns around, he heads back in. But
Yep.
good
uh
stuff. What's on your watch list?
so I got a chance to see a movie in theaters this week. I went to see Air. uh, this was particularly something I
Nice.
wanted to go see because I, ever since I was a kid, I love the Air Jordans. I love the Air Jordans. I love the sneakers. I loved all that stuff. And so
Nice.
getting to see the movie about how they went about recruiting Michael Jordan to Nike was really cool. It was a fun movie.
Yeah,
It was a
that's
nostalgic
awesome.
movie. Um, it was, yeah, it was well done. It was good. I mean, some people won't like it because they're not sneakerheads and they're not sports fans or whatever, but like to understand
Yeah.
the gravity
And
shift.
Michael Jordan's not actually in it.
Yeah, like this was a seismic gravity shift in both the sports industry and in the sneaker industry. Michael Jordan's arrival
Yeah.
and his combination with Nike. Nike, the number one selling Nike pair that they had sold was $3 million. They sold 3 million in a year for a particular shoe. The first Air Jordan sold $142 million worth of shoes. And even today, like
Yeah.
it's saying that Jordan earns like $400 million a year in passive income just because of his name association with that. Just a fascinating movie. So it really is it's a snapshot of cultural iconography um, that influenced the entire
Yeah.
1990s. I mean, the story takes place in the mid 80s, but like it became the influential thing that just colored all of the 1990s. So I got to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And really really interesting that they're telling that story now, particularly after, the miniseries that ran on what was it, HBO not too long ago during COVID. And really Jordan's kind of emergence back into a lot of the NBA scene. So yeah, good timing on that one.
Yeah, and I'll hit one real quickly. Mercury Rising, which was mid
Yeah.
'90s Bruce Willis action film. Yeah, it wasn't that good. it's, not, it's it's not particularly a memorable movie. There's
It's
not a
okay.
lot of
I
character
wonder,
development. Like
was it one of those was it one of those contract films? You're like, if you do this one, we'll give you the. We'll give you...
who knows? Because like he's supposed to be like watching this like autistic kid, and there's literally like zero connection between him and this kid. So like
Mm,
you don't have any sort of sense of connection between them. Like it just did not work. So Mercury Rising, you can skip that one. It's all right.
yeah. All right. We'll
And
do.
for I've been doing this weekly movie challenge on that Twitter feed called Weekly Movie Challenge. And last week was to watch an underdog story. And so I picked
Okay.
Gattaca, and I got to
All right.
rewatch Gattaca. I love that movie. It's great. It brings up a lot of interesting philosophical ideas about the difference between determinism and individual will. Um,
Mm,
in some ways, I think it overstates the case for individual will because there is a sense in which biology is at least at some levels a barrier. Maybe not to the and not anywhere close to the level where the determinists would have it. Um, but you know, at certain things like there's a line in there where it says like he didn't make a single error in a million keystrokes. Like that's
mm,
there is a biological reality to intelligence, or there is a biological reality to say like
Yeah, yeah.
Being at the highest levels. If you're at the very highest levels, there is a biological, like in sports or in academics or in something like this, there is a biological dimension. There is a sense in most everyday life in which
Yeah.
you can transcend certain aspects of it, but they're like, and so in some ways, I think it overstates the case, but I do think it's on the right track for the most part.
All right.
Okay. You got anything else?
Nah, man. I'm glad that I was able to be here
All right.
for the latest fans to film. This is awesome.
Yeah. Well, that is the podcast. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you check out filmforfans.com where we got lots of good content on there. And until next time, enjoy the movies.